Hello, BookTube. Right, after a bit of a delay, we are back down here in puppy territory to continue with this impromptu library tour that we've started in the biography section, my favorite kind of book. So we're on the third shelf, and we're just going to plow on here. Now, you're going to notice that this shelf has a theme. It doesn't have a theme right away, and then it has a theme in a major way. So we'll start with the transverse books, the ones that sit on top of the others on the shelf, just because you can't move them without. And the first one is an unlikely favorite of mine, something when I saw it coming in the catalogs, and I just groaned. I expected the worst. And it's this. It's Jonathan Rose's book, The Literary Churchill. And the reason I groaned is for the reason that you've seen on this channel. Because these little Churchill keyhole histories, Churchill's Menagerie, the Working with Winston, Churchill the Artist, all this sort of stuff, they end up almost always striking me as just a waste of time, as a book-length elaboration on what should never have been elaborated, a footnote. This is all about Churchill the reader, Churchill the literary critic, Churchill the book reviewer, Churchill the writer, and I thought it would be more of the same, and I shouldn't have, because this author wrote a big book about 20 years ago called The Intellectual Life of the British Working Class that is incredible. It's an incredible book. It's really about it's the intellectual life of the British working class, but it's really about the reading life, their life as readers. And I loved it. It's here in this room somewhere. I've read it 4 or 5 times. I think it's fantastic, inexhaustible. I should have let that guide me when this came out. And sure enough, I read it, and it's fantastic. It is the exception that proves the rule. It's a fantastic keyhole history. It's also a fantastic Churchill book. And I was very happy that I am included in the blurbs for it, because I can't praise it high enough. So there you go. It keeps me honest, I suppose, to occasionally be wrong. And this next one is a fantastic book. It's a Pimlico trade paperback. I love Pimlico trade paperbacks. I wish I had a lot of them. If you ever see them, if you're in the UK especially, and you're at a used bookshop and you see some Pimlico trade paperbacks, be sure to snap pictures and email them to me, so that you can find out whether or not I want them. But this is by Peter Gwynne, and it's The King's Cardinal. It's his biography of Cardinal Wolsey. And of the many, many, many books on Cardinal Wolsey, it is my favorite. I think it's just fantastic. There are a couple of others. There's a 2-volume Wolsey book called Naked to Mine Enemies that I wish I had. I've had it from time to time. The last time I got it was those those old Time Life paperbacks that are so stiff. They're made on such poor paper with such cheap glue that you can still find them at used bookstores, but you can't read them. They crack. They don't just break, they crack, like they're made of thin wood instead of paper. That was really good, that 2-volume book. And also there was a much earlier one, a much earlier biography of Wolsey that's also fantastic that I don't have anymore. But I'll take Peter Gwynne's. Absolutely. This is a great, great book. And it starts to move us towards a kind of quasi-theme. There are 2 themes on this show. The first one is the Churchill book doesn't touch it at all, except maybe it does, because Churchill's been the subject of not 1, not 2, but 3 multi-volume biographies. And the most famous, arguably the best-selling biography of Cardinal Wolsey was a 2-volume biography, Naked to Mine Enemies. And that always gets me thinking about the peculiar charm of a 2-volume biography. Multi-volume biographies, I think, are ridiculous. Writing a 6-volume life of anybody is ridiculous. But 2 volumes, I often like. There's often enough research with the pivotal figures in history to warrant 2 volumes. And oddly enough, I have found there's often a convenient dividing line for the volumes in the life of the subject. And that's going to carry us through these next few books, because the next few books we have are 2-volume biographies. The first one is by Churchill himself. It's his biography of his great ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough. And it's fantastic. This is a reprint from the University of Chicago Press from about 30 years ago. Very nicely done. You can find an abridged version of this work, usually in 4 volumes of very thin trade paperbacks. I think I saw that set I think I showed it on this channel at one point, that was issued in conjunction with the Masterpiece Theater production. That was so good. I think it was the first. Wasn't that it was a miniseries about the Duke and Duchess of Marlborough, and I think it was the first Masterpiece Theatre production. I'm pretty sure. It's terrifically good, so entertaining. But this is just Churchillian prose. It's flowing Macaulay-esque height. Just wonderful, wonderful stuff to read. Very happy to have it in a reprint because it's not abridged. And then this next one, also Macaulay-esque prose, but very much closer to the time of Macaulay. This is by A.M.W. Sterling, and this is Coke of Norfolk and His Friends, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And this is about William Coke, the great commoner, a big poobah of a British politician in the decades immediately leading up to the Victorian era. So he was a Georgian era politician and land reformer, friend of the downtrodden, friend of a certain revolution. And this is a type of biography that used to be very much more common than it is now, where the author goes through all the private papers. Holcombe Hall, those of you who maybe live in England, if you ever get a chance, if you haven't visited Holcombe Hall, you really, really should. That was his home. He was known as Coke of Norfolk, even in his own day. That was just a shorthand. Everybody called him that, like Grey of Faladon. But the home seat of his country home is Holcombe Hall, and it's amazing. Even now, as an airbrushed, National Heritage type tourist attraction, it's still amazing. It's just amazing. I have been intimate with the place in a way that tourists don't get to be, but tourists are free. I think that the place is free. I'm pretty sure that you can just wander around the halls, not the family wing, but everywhere else. The grounds, the halls, everywhere, and it's worth it to see. It is an amazing thing. And this is just the author going through the Coke archives, going through the history, sifting through the libraries and the writing archives of all the noble families of his own day in order to get correspondence and just assembling it all together into a gigantic kaleidoscope of the man and his time. These kinds of old, this is probably 150 years old, or no, this is probably 100 years old. These types of biographies are fairly easy to find at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston. That's why there are so many of them in this library tour. This will not be the last time you'll see something like this. I don't think it was either, right? This isn't the first time. I'm pretty sure. Well, you will see these old 2-volume grandee biographies. I had one of Earl Cromer from Egypt, but a bunch of others. And they show up at the Brattle Bookshop, and they don't tend to show up at other used bookstores, so I grab them when I can, because I've developed a sweet tooth for them. I really enjoy reading them. And that is the end of the mini theme of multi-volume works or biographies of people who have multi-volume biographies. Now we're going to move on to the major theme of this shelf and of the next few shelves, because we are entering into British royalty. And I love British royalty. I think it's an amazing spine on which to tell the history of the people and the times for going back 1,000 years. And also, I think that British royalty now, in the 21st century, is an utterly remarkable story. Maybe not so remarkable in its later generations, but I honestly do believe that Queen Elizabeth II is one of the most remarkable figures in history, for a whole bunch of reasons that don't shout from the rooftops. You actually have to sit and think for a while, or look at her in context, or best of all, imagine her done wrong. Imagine if her sister had been firstborn and had been queen this whole time. Imagine what that would have been like. So that's the theme, is British monarchy, and that is the larger theme, and the smaller theme is Queen Elizabeth II, because these next few books are all about her. We have Sally Bedell Smith, Elizabeth the Queen. That went right on the shelf when I found it at a used bookstore. We have a new book. This is Robert Hardman's Queen of the World, which takes an interesting approach. Ordinarily, new biographies of Queen Elizabeth II, she famously doesn't grant interviews, and so all you have to go on is hearsay and court records. So a big new book about her, I was skeptical, but this looks at her as not just queen, but also head of the Commonwealth, and really does a good job. I found myself reading this with interest instead of dutifully, so I had to make a place for it. Then we have Ben Pimlett's book, The Queen, in which he immortally refers to her as an ethnic minority of one. This is by far the most articulate and least stereotypical of all of the Elizabeth II biographies that don't just try to shock you. Then we have Sarah Bradford's Elizabeth. Sarah Bradford is an institution in the British biographical world, and here she does just her normal thing. It's you go to these things not for the revelations, but for the perspective. Because all these people are working with basically the same thing, and with basically the same records, basically the same kind of attitude, unless they have some kind of entree. If you have some kind of entree, like for instance, if you are well known in biographical circles, as Sarah Bradford is, or if, for instance, you are part of the British nobility, which brings us to Lady Elizabeth Longford, whose book on the Queen is indispensable for that purpose. Elizabeth Longford is on these shelves elsewhere for other books, like for instance her big book on Queen Victoria, which I wouldn't do without. And then, so that was a blast of a mini theme. That was Queen Elizabeth II. Now we move on to her son, Prince Charles. This is by Sally Bedell Smith. Again, this is her big book on Prince Charles that came out a couple of years ago. I am blurbed on this one as well, and I really enjoyed it. He's a very, very tough subject for a biography, and she does just about as good a job as you can do. And the reason that I hesitate on books like this, you might have even heard the hesitation in my voice, is because he is Prince of Wales. Unless something drastic happens, a major chapter in his life has not happened yet. If the monarchy survives the death of Elizabeth II, he will be king, even if it's just for a year, 2 years. So that will be the cause for a spate of new biographies. But until then, I think this is probably the best we're going to get. Then I noticed there's a little mass market paperback on the shelf here. I'm wondering why that is. Oh, okay. This is Peter Townsend's book on George VI that concentrates on his status as emperor, the last emperor of the British Empire. I don't know why that's doing on the shelf though. Well, here I'll set it aside, because that can open up some reorganization here, and reorganization is always good because I'm always jockeying for space on these biography shelves. I'm always adding more to them than they fit. Then we'll move on from Queen Elizabeth II. They go in roughly chronological order, and we're working from the ground up, so we're going in reverse order. So we'll now do the Queen Mother, and the Queen Elizabeth Queen Mother I have 2 books on her. The first one is Lady Colin Campbell's Tell-All. Sort of saucy tell-all about the Queen, respectful, but very much not an official biography, and very entertaining to read. And then we have the notoriously the enormous official biography. This is William Shawcross's The Queen Mother, in a big, stately hardcover. I've bought so many copies of this book and given it away to people because I find it just fascinating. I really do. I just find it fascinating. This is it's an official authorized court biography of a woman who lived for 101 years. So by any normal measure, this should be an incalculably boring book. And a lot of people that I know who have read it have thought that. I have one old friend who got to it before I did, and said, "Oh my God, this is a Steve book to end all Steve books." And I was happy to agree once I got it. I think it's wonderful. And there you go. That is our biography tour. We're continuing with this library tour. We'll do all of biographies. That'll take us quite some time, probably all summer, and then we'll just move on to the rest of the books in the library. So I'll wrap this up for now. But I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.